With that, I recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start by saying thank you. You are you're here voluntarily, is that correct?
Correct.
That is correct, sir.
Although you did receive the threat of a subpoena at one point. Is that also correct?
Received,
A threat of being subpoenaed to come today.
Chairman McCall mentioned that he wanted us to appear and that there are compulsory measures, which I took to mean subpoena, sure. But look at, that wasn't necessary from the beginning.
I know you came voluntarily, but I just want to get the point out that there was something in regards to, you know, a subpoena to come, correct?
I was not subpoenaed.
I said the threat of a subpoena to come. Or something
Let
compulsory.
me answer it like this. Before I retired, I testified several times, as well as John McKenzie, in open and classified hearings on Afghanistan. Prior to retirement, Chairman McCall asked me, would you be willing to discuss with the committee? I said, absolutely yes. No threat of subpoena, no compulsory, nothing. I said yes. I saw Chairman McCall again after retirement, and he reminded me of that conversation. I said, sure, absolutely. So in January and February of this year, we worked out you know, some of the details. I said I wanted to go back and review records, et cetera. And then it was originally supposed to be a closed, classified hearing, because I still think we're going to do one of those after this. And I thought that was important to be a classified hearing because a lot of information is still classified. And then there was this discussion of a public hearing.
Right, and, you know, so just speaking of that, when you've testified before the Armed Services Committee, is that correct?
Testified before the House and Senate Armed Services Committees in both classified and open hearings, and then have testified about Afghanistan and several other testimonies that weren't
Same
specific
with you,
to
right, General
Afghanistan.
McKenzie?
That's correct, sir.
And is your testimony, has anything changed from when you were in uniform and testifying to what you've testified today? Has there anything that you know, didn't testify to before that you're testifying to now? Is there any change of thought of what took place today from what you testified to previously?
In general, for me, everything that I testified before is still true and accurate today, and in open testimony, that would be correct. I have learned more about Abbey Gate because of the investigations. That wasn't available during previous testimonies. For me, it wasn't. But I have since read those investigations and been briefed on them, but they weren't available the first time.
So your testimony today is still basically consistent and transparent to your
Yes,
testimony?
it's totally consistent.
General McKenzie?
That's the same for me.
Right, so there's not really anything new that was learned today because you've testified to it before, right?
I'll leave that to y'all to determine if there's anything new.
I'm
but
just
I've
asking
testified
you,
before.
from your testimony and from what you know, what has been made public and what has been public,
Sure.
it's basically, this is not something
Well, so,
new.
Ranking Member, as I mentioned in my opening statement, much of what I say today is going to mirror the 10 hours of
That's my
testimony
point,
I gave
that this
earlier.
is not anything groundbreaking or anything that, you know, is being discovered newly. This is something that has been out in the public from the time that you testified back in 2022, right? Nothing groundbreaking here. Fact of the matter is, let me ask this question. I think maybe it was you, General Milley, said that the framework for what took place during the 20 years, because I think that we should be looking at, if we really want to figure out what went wrong, what we need to fix, we need to look at the entire 20 years of being in Afghanistan, not just the last few months. Would you say that's correct?
Yes, and I said that before as well in previous testimony. Now, in the written remarks that I'm submitting for the record, I've elaborated on what I think are, say, top 10 lessons learned, but there's many more. You're not going to learn all the lessons of a 20-year war in short sessions, but I think there's a huge amount of lessons to be learned over the course of 20 years. You know, should we have gone after bin Laden in 2001 in that winter when we had him more or less from an intel standpoint? We thought we had him located. Should we? Could we have? Yes. Should we have? I think yes. In hindsight, that would have changed the trajectory of the whole war. And there's a whole series of lessons along the way. Specific to this hearing and to help these families, I think the focus is more recent relative to the withdrawal itself and the Abbey Gate and the NEO. But you're correct. A holistic view, absolutely, I think, but that's going to take a considerable amount of time.
Would you say that the Doha agreement that was done under the Trump administration had some connection to the conditions on the ground when Joe Biden became president and leading on up into to what took place at Abbey Gate? There was a nexus there. Is that not correct?
Yeah, I think that the end game, if you will, the final, months, I think the framework of that is set by the Doha agreement, absolutely.
So if we're going to study to find out the findings of what we should do, we should be talking about what happened during the Trump administration as well as what took place during the Biden administration, because they are connected. They're not separate. And so if we're serious about trying to figure out what took place and why it took place, we should be looking at both what took place under the Bush administration, the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and, is that not correct?
Sure. As you point out, 4 presidents. I think there's half a dozen secretaries of defense, half a dozen secretaries of state. There's half a dozen chairmen of Joint Chiefs of Staff. There's another 4 commanders in Afghanistan. So yes, there's absolutely lessons to be learned through all of this. And the end game, using the Doha agreement, if you wanted to say that was the start point, sure, there's a lot to be said about that as well. And there is a continuum. As I mentioned in my opening statement, there's no phenomenon like the end of a war.
My point is this. If we've taken a serious look at this, you can't just take a peek at one little segment of it and say this is the reason everything happened without looking at what preceded it, because you'd have to look at it in its entirety. Isn't that correct? If you're serious about trying to figure out how we're going to make sure the mistakes that may have made and the things that we did right, you can only do that in a serious investigation if you take all of it and you look at all of it and you examine all of it, not just piecemealing that. Would you agree with that?
Of course. I mean, I said that in my opening statement. I said in previous testimony that a holistic look at the whole war in order to really determine outcomes, et cetera. And anything as complex as a war is not the result of a single causal factor. There's multiple factors and multiple decisions. So yes, in general, I agree. But I'm here for these families to try to get them answers and to try to get answers on the immediate issues that are at hand.
So I know the chairman went, so I just want to do the same amount of time that he had. I don't want to get cut off there. So let me ask this. With the conclusion of the Doha deal, the Taliban stopped attacking U.S. forces inside Afghanistan. Is that correct?
Well, yes, lethal attacks. They committed to not doing that. There were some attacks, but they committed to not conducting lethal attacks. And by my memory, I don't think there was a lethal attack on U.S. forces.
So let me ask this, because we're running out of
February
time. I saw the chairman finished about with 5 minutes there. So, and when the United States committed to the Doha deal, that was to withdraw, and I quote, withdraw from Afghanistan all military forces of the United States, its allies, coalition partners, including all non-diplomatic civilian personnel, private security contractors, trainers, advisors, and supporting service personnel. Is that correct? That was the Doha deal done under the Trump administration. Is that correct?
As I recall, I think there was 7 conditions that the United States signed up to and 8 conditions that the Taliban signed up to. And I think you rattled off most of the key ones. It was a very explicit thing. It said you had to go from there were 13,000, more or less, 13,000 U.S. troops when Doha was signed, and then you had to go to 8,600 in 135 days.
Let me just do this. I want to make sure. And so therefore, the withdrawal was well underway in January 2021 after President Trump withdrew U.S. forces, notwithstanding concerns about the Taliban's behavior. Is that correct?
The withdrawal was absolutely underway. The drawdown of forces was underway. That's correct.
So I don't have time, but I would like, because I would like to do a complete investigation. That is what I think that our committee has the responsibility, so that we can really be transparent with the American people on everything that took place in the 20 years in Afghanistan. Not just one piece, but everything, if we are serious and not playing politics with this issue. Yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired.